Her billionaire CEO ex-husband's cameras caught her daughter sneaking into his estate every night to sleep in the room that was once hers. The man who built a $4.7 billion empire from nothing stood frozen in his own nursery, staring at a 12-year-old girl who had just broken into his mansion for the 17th consecutive night. She looked up at him with eyes that mirrored his own, gray-green and unflinching, her voice steady despite being caught. "I'm not here to steal anything. I know. You've been coming here for 18 nights. If you wanted to steal something, you'd have done it by now. 17. Tonight makes 17. He studied her face in the moonlight streaming through the window, seeing features he recognized from his own reflection and contours that belonged to a woman he'd walked away from 12 years ago. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "What's your name?" Her chin lifted, defiant and vulnerable all at once. "Mira. Mira Lawson." Lawson. His ex-wife's maiden name. The surname she'd reclaimed after he'd signed divorce papers in an airport lounge without looking back. He forced himself to ask the question even though part of him already knew the answer. "And why are you here, Mira Lawson?" She looked around the nursery, at the hand-painted constellations on the ceiling, at the planetary mobile that still caught the light after all these years, at the shimmering wallpaper that looked like distant galaxies. When her eyes returned to his, they were bright with unshed tears. "Because this room was supposed to be mine. And I wanted to know what it felt like. Just once. To sleep in a place my father made for me before he decided I wasn't worth staying for." Have you ever been so consumed by climbing the ladder of success that you missed the most important phone call of your life? What if that one moment of distraction, that one time you said "not right now," cost you everything that truly mattered? What if the empire you built became a prison and the daughter you never knew existed had to break into your own home just to feel wanted? If you've ever wondered whether success is worth the sacrifice, whether the corner office and the billion-dollar deals mean anything when you're alone, you need to hear this story. Hit that like button right now and subscribe to Mr. Steven's Stories, because what happens next will make you question everything you think you know about winning in life. This is a story about a man who had everything and a girl who had nothing except the courage to claim what should have been hers all along. Damian Cole was not a man who believed in regret. Regret was for people who made emotional decisions, people who let feelings cloud their judgment, people who looked backward instead of forward. He had built Astral Innovations from a college dorm room idea into a technology empire that spanned 3 continents. At 42 years old, he commanded boardrooms full of people twice his age, predicted market trends with accuracy that bordered on supernatural, and negotiated billion-dollar mergers before his first coffee of the morning. But regret, real crushing devastating regret, was exactly what he felt at 11:18 p.m. on a Tuesday night when his security system chimed for the 17th time in 17 days. The first night, he barely noticed. He was in Tokyo finalizing an acquisition that would expand Astral's reach into the Asian market. The alert came through on his phone. Eastern Perimeter Breach, Camera 12, Nursery Wing. He'd assumed it was a malfunction. The AI-powered surveillance system he'd personally designed was supposed to be flawless, but even the best technology had glitches. The second night, he paid attention. He was back in his estate, the sprawling $50 million property in the hills overlooking the city. The alert came at 11:23 p.m. Same camera. Same location. He pulled up the live feed on his tablet, expecting to see a deer or maybe a large bird that had triggered the motion sensors. Instead, he saw a figure. Small, deliberate, moving through the darkness with purpose. Damian sat up straighter in his study, setting down the whiskey he'd poured but hadn't touched. He rewound the footage, watching frame by frame. The figure entered from the eastern edge of the property, slipping through a gap in the hedge line that Damian himself didn't know existed. The cameras there were positioned to capture threats approaching from the street, not someone leaving through a weakness in his security infrastructure. Whoever this was had studied his system. Had found its blind spots. Had exploited them with the kind of patience that made Damian's pulse quicken with something he couldn't quite name. On night 3, he watched the entire sequence. The figure arrived at 11:15, removed the window screen from the outside of the nursery with careful precision, climbed through, replaced the screen, and disappeared into the room. 6 hours later, just before dawn, the figure emerged and retraced the same path back through the property. They never touched anything else. Never explored the rest of the house. Never triggered any other alarms. Just the nursery. Always the nursery. By night 4, Damien had his phone in his hand, Sterling Security's emergency number already dialed. His finger hovered over the call button. One press and armed professionals would be on site in under 8 minutes. They'd catch whoever this was, press charges, restore the sanctity of his property. But something stopped him. The way the figure moved. Not rushed. Not frantic. Not like someone committing a crime. There was a strange familiarity to it, a comfort in the movements that didn't match the profile of a typical intruder. He set the phone down and watched instead. Night 5. Night 6. Night 7. By the 7th night, he'd watched enough footage to discern details. The figure was a child. Maybe 12, maybe 13. Wearing a dark hoodie that obscured their face, moving with a peculiar combination of fear and determination that reminded Damien of something he couldn't quite place. On night 8, he enhanced the footage, adjusting the contrast and brightness until he could make out more. A backpack. Sneakers that had seen better days. Small hands that moved with surprising confidence as they manipulated the window screen. Whoever this child was, they weren't here to steal. They were here for something else. Something that lived in a room Damien had tried very hard to forget. The nursery had been Aria's idea. Aria. The name still hit him like a punch to the sternum even after 12 years. Aria Lawson, the woman who'd believed in him when he was just another kid with a dream and a laptop. The woman who'd invested her modest inheritance into his startup when venture capitalists laughed him out of their offices. The woman who'd stood beside him through the brutal early years, celebrating the small victories and cushioning the devastating failures. The woman he'd married on a Tuesday afternoon in a courthouse because they were too busy building a company to plan a wedding. Back then, they'd believed they could have it all. Love and success. Partnership and profit. A family and a fortune. The nursery had been conceived during their 3rd year of marriage, when Astral Innovations finally turned profitable and the future looked limitless. Aria had found an interior designer who specialized in celestial themes, someone who could transform a simple room into something magical. "I want our child to grow up knowing they're made of stardust," Aria had said, her eyes bright with dreams Damien had been too busy to fully appreciate. "I want them to look up every night and see the universe looking back." The designer had delivered. Hand-painted constellations covered the ceiling, accurate to the night sky above the exact location where Damien and Aria had first said "I love you." A mobile of planets hung above where the crib would eventually go, each sphere carefully weighted to spin and catch the light at different angles. The wallpaper shimmered like distant galaxies, deep purples and blues that seemed to hold infinite depth. It had cost a fortune. Damien had written the check without blinking. Back then, he'd still believed that money could buy happiness, or at least the environment where happiness could flourish. That was before the late nights became early mornings. Before early mornings became entire weeks in different cities. Before the board meetings and investor calls and product launches consumed every hour of every day until Damien could barely remember what his own wife's voice sounded like when she wasn't asking him about his schedule. Aria had tried. God, she had tried. "Can we have dinner tonight? Just us. I've got the Singapore team on a call at 8. Tomorrow, maybe." Tomorrow came and went. Then another tomorrow. Then another. "I miss you," she'd said one night when he stumbled home at 2 a.m. to find her awake in the living room. "Not your body in the house. You. The person I married." "I'm building something for us," he'd replied, the defense coming automatically. This is all for our future. But what future are we building if we're not in it together? He should have heard the desperation in her voice. He should have seen the way her hand rested on her stomach, protective and uncertain. He should have noticed that she'd been wearing the same sweater for 3 days, that there were circles under her eyes, that she looked like someone trying very hard to hold something precious together while it crumbled in her hands. Instead, he'd kissed her forehead absently and gone to his study to prep for a morning presentation. The phone call came 3 weeks before the divorce papers. He was in his office, surrounded by acquisition documents for a company in London. Aria's name lit up his screen. He almost didn't answer. He had a meeting in 20 minutes and he needed to review the financial projections one more time. But something, maybe guilt or maybe the last flickering ember of the love they'd once shared, made him pick up. "Damien?" Her voice sounded small. Uncertain. "Can we talk? Really talk, not just coordinate logistics?" He glanced at the clock. 17 minutes until his meeting. "Is everything okay? I need to tell you something. Something important. Can it wait until tonight? I've got the London deal presentation in a few minutes and I really need to focus." Silence on the other end. He could hear her breathing, could almost feel her gathering courage or maybe letting it slip away. "Sure. Tonight. After the London deal closes, we'll sit down and really talk. I promise." "Okay." She sounded distant now. Resigned. "Good luck with the presentation." "Thanks, babe." He'd hung up and gone back to his documents, already forgetting the conversation. The London deal had closed. It had been a massive success, adding 200 million to Astral's valuation overnight. Damien had celebrated with champagne and congratulations from the board. Aria had never brought up that conversation again. 2 weeks later, the divorce papers arrived via courier. He'd been at the airport, waiting for a flight to Singapore for yet another negotiation. He'd signed them in the business class lounge, between emails, convincing himself that this was the merciful thing to do. They'd grown apart. It happened. Better to end it cleanly than drag out the inevitable. He'd transferred a generous settlement into her account. $3 million. Enough to start over, to build whatever life she wanted without him. Money solved problems. That was what Damien understood. What he didn't understand, what he'd never allowed himself to understand, was that some problems couldn't be solved with a wire transfer. Aria had disappeared from his life as completely as if she'd never existed. Changed her phone number. Moved to an address he didn't know. Reclaimed her maiden name. He'd told himself it was for the best, that closure meant never looking back, that successful people didn't dwell on failed relationships. For 12 years, he'd believed it. Now, standing in his climate-controlled study with untouched whiskey and security footage of a child breaking into his home, Damien felt the foundation of those beliefs beginning to crack. On night 18, he made a decision. He wouldn't call the police. He wouldn't upgrade the cameras or reinforce the hedge line or patch the security gap. He wouldn't send armed guards to catch a child who'd never stolen anything more valuable than a few hours of sleep in a room that no one else wanted. Instead, he would wait. He positioned himself in the sitting room that adjoined the nursery, a space Aria had envisioned as a reading nook for late-night feedings and early morning cuddles. He turned off all the lights and settled into the overstuffed chair by the window, invisible in the darkness. The house settled around him into its evening rhythms. The soft mechanical hum of the climate control system. The distant whisper of water features in the garden. The creaks and sighs of a $50 million estate that somehow felt emptier than the college dorm room where he'd started. At 10:47, Damien's heart began to hammer against his ribs. The anticipation felt like the moments before a major product launch, that electric combination of excitement and terror when everything you've built hangs in the balance. At 11:03, he heard it. The careful scrape of the window screen being removed from the outside. He held his breath, every muscle in his body tense. A small figure climbed through the window with practiced efficiency. They paused just inside, perfectly still, listening to the silence. Then they reached up and lowered their hood. Damien's world tilted on its axis. She was maybe 12 years old. Dark hair pulled into a messy braid that had probably been neat that morning. She wore jeans with worn knees and a hoodie that had seen too many washes. But it was her face that stopped Damien's heart. His eyes. That particular shade of gray-green that everyone had always said was so distinctive. The shape of her jaw, the way she held her shoulders, that was pure Aria. But the intensity in her gaze, the analytical way she scanned the room before moving, that came from somewhere else. That came from him. The girl moved to the small velvet couch beneath the planetary mobile and curled into it with the ease of long practice. She pulled a thin blanket from her backpack, something threadbare and clearly loved, and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then she looked up at the constellations on the ceiling. The expression on her face made Damien's chest constrict. It wasn't sadness, though there was sadness there. It wasn't longing, though longing colored every feature. It was something more complicated, more devastating. It was the look of someone trying to imagine a life that should have been theirs, trying to feel connected to a history they'd been denied. Damien stood up from the shadows and spoke quietly. "You're good." Most professional security teams wouldn't have found that gap in coverage. The girl jolted upright, eyes wide, body coiled to run. But she didn't run. Instead, she studied him with the same analytical intensity he used in boardroom negotiations, weighing options, calculating odds, deciding on a strategy in real time. He saw the moment she made her choice. Her spine straightened. Her chin lifted. "I'm not here to steal anything. I know." Damien remained in the doorway, deliberately keeping distance between them so she wouldn't feel trapped. "You've been coming here for 18 nights. If you wanted to steal something, you'd have done it by now." 17. Her correction was automatic, precise. Tonight makes 17. Despite everything, despite the surreal impossibility of this moment, Damien almost smiled. Precision ran in families, apparently. "What's your name?" The girl's defiance wavered for just a second, vulnerability flickering across her features before she locked it down again. "Mira. Mira Lawson." Lawson. The name hit him like a physical blow. Aria's maiden name. The name she'd reclaimed when she'd erased him from her life. "And why are you here, Mira Lawson?" She looked around the nursery, her gaze traveling across the constellations that had waited 12 years to be appreciated, the furniture that had never been used, the dreams that had calcified into dust. When her eyes came back to his, they shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. "Because this room was supposed to be mine. And I wanted to know what it felt like. Just once. To sleep in a place my father made for me before he decided I wasn't worth staying for." The words detonated in Damien's chest. All the air left his lungs in a rush. All the justifications he'd built over 12 years, the career success and the innovation and the empire worth $4.7 billion, all of it crumbled into irrelevance in the face of this simple devastating truth. He had a daughter. He had a daughter who had spent 17 nights breaking into his home just to feel wanted. Sometimes we're so focused on building our dreams that we forget to notice the people who are trying to be part of them. If this story is hitting you somewhere deep, drop a comment below telling me what matters most in your life. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Steven's Stories because this journey is about to get even more powerful. What happens next will change everything. Mira. Damien's voice cracked on her name. "I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know you existed." She watched him carefully, searching his face for lies, for manipulation, for the 1,000 ways adults had probably disappointed her before. He could see her weighing his words against whatever narrative she'd constructed about him. "Well." Her whisper was barely audible. "Now you do." "How?" Damien had to stop and steady himself. How did this happen? Your mother, Arya, she never told me. Myra's expression hardened. She tried. You were too busy. The accusation landed with precision. Damien felt himself falling backward through time, searching for the memory, finding it in fragments. The phone call. 3 weeks before the divorce. Arya's voice, uncertain, asking if they could talk. Really talk. And he'd said what? Not right now. After the London deal closes. The London deal had closed. Arya had never called back. Oh God. Damien's legs felt unsteady. He moved carefully to the rocking chair Arya had picked out, lowering himself into it before his knees could give out. She was pregnant. When she called me, she was trying to tell me she was pregnant. Mira nodded slowly. 3 months along, according to Mom. She said you were reviewing some important documents. She said you sounded distracted. She said she almost told you anyway, but then you said you had a meeting and you'd talk later. But we never talked later. No. Myra's voice was flat. You signed divorce papers instead. Sent her $3 million and disappeared. Damien closed his eyes. The rocking chair creaked beneath him, a sound that should have been soothing but felt like mockery. Every decision he'd made, every priority he'd set, every moment he'd chosen work over his wife, it had all led here. To this nursery. To this child who was his and not his, who existed because of him and despite him. Tell me about her. He opened his eyes and looked at Mira directly. Tell me about your mother. About your life. Myra's defensive posture softened slightly. She pulled the threadbare blanket tighter around her shoulders. Mom never said bad things about you. That's important for you to know. She could have made you the villain, but she didn't. What did she say? She said you were brilliant. She said you had dreams bigger than most people could imagine. She said you worked harder than anyone she'd ever met. She paused, choosing her words carefully. She said you loved her once, but you loved your ambition more. And that wasn't evil or cruel. It was just true. The assessment was so achingly Arya, so measured and fair even in the face of abandonment, that Damien felt tears prick his eyes for the first time in years. Where do you live? An apartment across town. Mom works 2 jobs. Waitressing during the day, bookkeeping at night. We're okay. Not rich, but okay. 2 jobs. While he lived in a $50 million estate with rooms he'd never entered and wealth he couldn't spend in 3 lifetimes. The injustice of it was staggering. How did you find me? Mira shrugged with the false casualness of a child trying to seem braver than she felt. Google. You're pretty famous, you know. Billionaire tech CEO, youngest person to ever make the Forbes list in your category. Your address isn't public, but it's not that hard to find if you know where to look. And the security system? I watched YouTube videos about residential security. Read some forums. Your system is really good, by the way. Military grade. But you made one mistake. What's that? You designed it to keep people out. Not to stop someone from leaving. The cameras on the eastern perimeter all face outward. There's a 3-second gap in coverage if you know the angles. The hedge line has a weak point where 2 sections don't quite meet. And the nursery window lock is original to the house, not integrated into your smart system. Damien stared at her, seeing himself in every calculated observation, every logical deduction. She had his mind. His analytical approach. His ability to see patterns and exploit weaknesses. How many nights were you planning to keep coming here? Mira looked away, suddenly looking her age, suddenly looking like a child instead of a tactical genius. I don't know. Until I got caught, I guess. Or until it didn't hurt anymore. Until what didn't hurt? She gestured around the nursery, at the constellations and the mobile and the shimmering wallpaper. Knowing this existed. Knowing you made this for me before I was even born and then just left it empty. I used to imagine what it would have been like to grow up here. To have a dad who was around. To not watch my mom work herself to exhaustion just to keep us fed. Guilt crashed over Damien in waves. Mira, I'm so sorry. She looked at him with eyes too old for her face. Sorry doesn't change 12 years. No. It doesn't. But maybe. He stopped, uncertain how to proceed. Maybe it's not too late to change the next 12. Myra's laugh was bitter. What are you going to do? Write me a check like you did for Mom? Throw money at the problem and go back to your empire? No. The word came out fiercer than Damien intended. I want to know you. I want to be your father. If you'll let me. Why? She studied him skeptically. Guilt? Obligation? Because it's the right thing to do. Because. Damien searched for honesty in a lifetime of carefully constructed corporate speak. Because for 12 years I've built things that don't matter. Companies and products and wealth that looks impressive on paper but feels empty in practice. And you're sitting here in a room I made for a child I didn't know I had, and you're real in a way nothing else in my life has been real for a very long time. Mira was quiet for a long moment. Mom's sick. The words dropped like stones into still water. What? Cancer. Stage 4. She got diagnosed 6 months ago. 6 months. The timeline clicked into place. That's when you started coming here. Yeah. Myra's voice wavered. The doctors say maybe weeks now. Maybe a month if we're lucky. I wanted. Her composure finally cracked. I wanted to feel like I had something. Some connection to a parent who wasn't dying. Even if you didn't know I existed. Even if it was just sleeping in this room and pretending. Oh sweetheart. Damien's professional reserve shattered completely. I need you to take me to her. Right now. Tonight. Why? Because I've already lost 12 years. I'm not losing whatever time is left. 20 minutes later, Damien's $200,000 car pulled up outside a modest apartment complex in a neighborhood his GPS had labeled as moderate risk. The building was clean but tired, the kind of place where people worked hard and still struggled to make rent. Mira led him up 3 flights of stairs to apartment 7B. She hesitated outside the door, key in hand. She doesn't know I've been sneaking out. She thinks I'm asleep in my room. Then let's not lead with that part. Mira unlocked the door and they stepped into a small apartment that was nothing like Damien's estate but somehow felt more like a home than anywhere he'd lived in 12 years. Worn furniture arranged with care. Photographs on every surface. Books stacked on shelves and tables and floors. The scent of something that had been soup or stew, long since eaten. Mom. Mira called out softly. You awake? A voice came from what must have been the bedroom, weak but familiar in a way that made Damien's heart stop. Mira? Baby, what are you doing up? It's late. I brought someone. Someone who wants to see you. Honey, I'm not really up for visitors. Mira looked at Damien, her expression unreadable. Then she pushed open the bedroom door. Aria Lawson sat propped against pillows, a book open in her lap. She'd lost weight, her frame almost fragile beneath an oversized sweater. Her hair, once long and dark, was short and shot through with premature gray. But her eyes, those eyes Damien had once known better than his own, were still the same warm brown that had looked at him with love and later with disappointment and finally with resignation. Those eyes widened when she saw him standing in her doorway. Damien. His name on her lips, after 12 years of silence, nearly broke him. Hello, Aria. She looked from him to Mira and back again, understanding dawning across her features. She told you. She showed me. Every night for 17 nights, she's been breaking into my estate to sleep in the nursery. Our nursery. Aria's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, Mira. Baby, you didn't. I'm sorry, Mom. I needed to. Aria's eyes filled with tears. You could have been hurt. Arrested. You can't just break into people's homes. She's my daughter. Damien's voice was rough with emotion. She has every right to that room. More right than anyone else in the world. Aria looked at him for a long moment, and in her gaze he saw everything they'd been and everything they'd lost and everything that could never be recovered. You didn't know. It wasn't a question. I didn't know. If I had. What would you have done, Damien? Really? The question hung in the air between them. He could lie. He could say he would have changed everything, cancelled every meeting, abandoned every deal, become the father and husband they deserved. But Aria had always seen through his lies. I don't know. The admission cost him. I want to say I would have done the right thing, but the man I was 12 years ago. I honestly don't know. I was so consumed by success, so convinced that everything else could wait. I would have tried, maybe. But whether I would have actually changed. He shook his head. I can't promise you I would have. Aria's expression softened with something that looked like forgiveness or maybe just exhaustion. At least you're honest now. Mira told me you're sick. Yes. How long? Aria glanced at her daughter, and Damien saw the calculation in her eyes, the way she was weighing how much truth to speak in front of the child who'd already lost so much. Not long. Weeks, most likely. Then move in with me. Both of you. Tomorrow. Tonight. I'll hire the best medical team in the country. I'll. Damien. Aria's voice was gentle but firm. I don't want your guilt. I don't want your money buying me a few extra days in some state-of-the-art facility. I've made my peace with this. This isn't about guilt. It's about our daughter. When you're. After. He couldn't make himself say the words. She'll be alone. Unless I step up. Unless I finally do what I should have done 12 years ago. And what's that? Be her father. Mira spoke up from where she stood near the door. Mom, please. I want to know him. I want whatever time we have left to be together. All of us. Aria looked at her daughter, at the child she'd raised alone through every hardship and sacrifice, and Damien saw the moment her resolve wavered. This isn't some temporary guilt trip. She asked him. You're not going to upend our lives and then disappear when it gets hard or your company needs you. Damien thought about his office, his board meetings, his endless obligations. Then he looked at Mira, at this brilliant brave girl who'd risked arrest just to feel connected to him, and made a choice that felt like the first real decision he'd made in 12 years. I'm taking a leave of absence from Astral. Effective immediately. However long this takes, however long you need, I'm not going anywhere. You'd walk away from your company. I'd walk away from everything. His voice broke. I already lost 12 years. I'm not losing whatever time we have left. Aria closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. Okay. The word was barely a whisper. Okay. Life has a way of showing us what truly matters when we're about to lose it. If this story is touching your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Mr. Stephen's Stories and turn on notifications because the next part of this journey will remind you why family is everything. Drop a comment telling me about a moment that changed your perspective on what really matters. The next morning, Damien sent an email to his board of directors that would have been unthinkable 48 hours earlier. He was taking indefinite personal leave. His chief operating officer would assume leadership duties. He would be available for emergencies but otherwise unreachable. His phone exploded with calls and texts. The board was in crisis. Investors were panicking. The media was speculating about everything from health problems to hostile takeovers. Damien turned off his phone and didn't turn it back on. Instead, he spent the day moving Arya and Mira into his estate. He carried boxes of books and photographs, clothes and mementos, all the small precious things that made a life. He hired a medical team that set up equipment in the master suite, transforming it into something between a bedroom and a hospital room but trying very hard to feel like neither. And he converted the nursery into Myra's actual room. She stood in the doorway watching as movers brought in her belongings, her expression caught somewhere between wonder and disbelief. "You're sure?" she asked. "This room has been empty for 12 years. It feels weird to just claim it." Damien knelt down so they were eye level. "This room was made for you before you were born. It's been waiting for you all this time. There's nothing weird about claiming what's yours." She looked up at the constellations, at the mobile of planets, at the shimmering wallpaper. "Mom used to tell me about it. When I was little and asked about my dad, she described this room. She said you and her designed it together. She said you wanted me to know I was made of stardust. We did. I did. Do you still believe that? That people are made of stardust? I believe that you are. Everything good and brilliant and brave. You're made of the best parts of both of us, and somehow you turned out better than we deserved." Myra's eyes filled with tears. "I used to hate you, you know. When I was younger. Mom never said bad things, but I could read between the lines. I knew you'd chosen your company over us. I knew you'd left before I was even born. And I hated you for it. And now? Now I don't know. You're here. You're actually here. But for how long? What happens after Mom?" She couldn't finish the sentence. Damien pulled her into a hug, feeling her stiffen for a moment before relaxing into it. "What happens after is that I'm still here. I'm your father, Mira. That doesn't have an expiration date. That doesn't end when things get hard or inconvenient. I'm learning how to do this, and I'm going to make mistakes, but I'm not leaving. Not ever again." She buried her face against his shoulder and cried in a way that felt like 12 years of grief finally finding release. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was both strange and strangely right. Damien learned the shape of fatherhood through small moments. Making breakfast while Mira did homework at the kitchen counter. Helping her study for a math test and discovering she'd inherited his analytical mind but had better intuition than he'd ever had. Reading to her at night in the nursery that was finally being used as intended, both of them looking up at the constellations together. And spending time with Arya. They sat together in the master suite, talking through years of silence in the compressed timeline that terminal illness demanded. She told him about the pregnancy, about her decision to raise Mira alone rather than force obligation on a man who'd already checked out of their marriage. She told him about the lean years, the moments of doubt, the fierce love that had carried her through. He told her about the empire he'd built, about the success that tasted like ashes, about the loneliness of having everything except what mattered. He apologized in every way he knew how, knowing it was inadequate, saying it anyway. And slowly, painfully, they found something that wasn't quite forgiveness but wasn't quite resentment either. Something like understanding. Something like peace. "I don't regret her," Arya said one afternoon, her voice weak but certain. "Even with everything that happened, even with how hard it's been, I don't regret Mira for a second. She's extraordinary. She's ours." Arya smiled. "The best thing we ever made. Better than any company or product or fortune. She's the thing we got right." 3 weeks after Mira had led Damien to that apartment, 3 weeks after his life had fractured and reformed into something unrecognizable and infinitely more real, Arya called them both to her bedside. She looked impossibly small against the pillows, her breathing labored, her skin pale. But her eyes were clear and focused. "Come here. Both of you." Damien and Mira moved to either side of the bed. Arya reached out and took their hands, connecting them in a circuit of 3. "I need you both to promise me something." "Anything," Damien said. "Mom, you don't have to." Myra's voice broke. "Hush, sweetheart. Listen." Arya looked at Damien. "You're her father. Not because of biology and not because of guilt. You're her father because you choose to be. Every day, in every decision, you choose her. Promise me that doesn't change when I'm gone. Promise me you won't let work or obligation or anything else come before her." "I promise." He meant it with every fiber of his being. "She's my priority. My only priority." Arya turned to Mira. "And you, my brilliant girl. Don't be afraid to need him. Don't be afraid to ask for help or to lean on him when things get hard. He's here because he wants to be, not because he has to be. Let him love you the way I know he's capable of loving you." Mira was crying too hard to speak. She just nodded. "You're both going to be okay." Arya's grip on their hands weakened. "You're going to be better than okay. You're going to be a family." "We already are," Damien whispered. Arya smiled, and in that smile he saw the girl he'd fallen in love with in a college library, the woman who'd believed in his dreams, the mother who'd sacrificed everything for their child. "Yes." Her eyes drifted closed. "You already are." She died 2 hours later, holding both their hands, surrounded by love, leaving behind a daughter who would carry her strength and a man who'd finally learned what really mattered. The funeral was small. Just Damien and Mira and a handful of Arya's friends from work, people who spoke about her kindness and her resilience and the way she'd made everyone around her feel seen. Damien listened to them describe his ex-wife, hearing stories of a life he'd never been part of, feeling the weight of everything he'd missed. Afterward, in the limousine heading back to the estate, Mira spoke for the first time all day. "What happens now?" Damien looked at his daughter, at this 12-year-old girl who'd just lost her entire world, and made a silent vow to be the parent she deserved. "Now we figure out how to be a family. Together. Do you even know how to do that?" "No. But I'm going to learn. And you're going to teach me." The months that followed were messy and complicated and nothing like the clean narratives Damien was used to from business. There were arguments about homework and bedtimes and the fact that having unlimited money didn't mean unlimited privileges. There were tears over memories of Arya and fears about the future. There were moments when Damien questioned everything and moments when Mira pushed every boundary just to see if he'd stay. But he did stay. He learned to braid hair even though his first 17 attempts were disasters. He learned the names of Myra's teachers and friends. He showed up to parent-teacher conferences and school plays and science fairs. He turned down acquisition offers and board positions and speaking engagements because they conflicted with dinner or homework help or just being present. And slowly, tentatively, they built something real. Mira taught him how to make Arya's soup recipe, the one she'd made when Mira was sick. Damien taught her advanced coding and was delighted to discover she had an intuition for it that surpassed his own. They established traditions. Friday movie nights. Sunday morning pancakes. Looking up at the constellations together before bed and talking about everything and nothing. One night, about 6 months after Arya's death, Mira appeared in Damien's study where he was reviewing some documents he'd finally agreed to look at for the company. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you miss it? Your old life? Running the company? Being important?" Damien set down the papers and gave her his full attention. "I miss the clarity sometimes. Business is straightforward. You make a decision, you see results. Being a parent is messier. That's not an answer." "You're right." He smiled. "No, I don't miss it. Or maybe I miss parts of it, but not enough to go back. You know what I realized? What? I built a $4.7 billion empire and almost died empty. I had everything the world says you're supposed to want, and I was profoundly, devastatingly alone. But now I have you. And that's worth more than any company or fortune or achievement. Mira was quiet for a moment. I'm glad you're my dad. The words hit Damien with the force of a revelation. I'm glad I'm your dad too. Best job I've ever had. She grinned and started to leave, then turned back. Hey, Dad. It was the first time she'd called him that without hesitation or irony or testing how it felt. Just Dad. Simple and true. Yeah. I love you. His throat tightened. I love you too, sweetheart. So much. After she left, Damien sat in his study thinking about the man he'd been 18 months ago. The billionaire CEO who measured success in dollars and deals. The person who'd signed divorce papers in an airport lounge and convinced himself he was doing the right thing. The father who'd never known his daughter existed because he'd been too distracted to listen when his wife tried to tell him. That man felt like a stranger now. 5 years later, Damien stood in the auditorium at Stanford University, watching his 17-year-old daughter give a presentation on ethical artificial intelligence to a room full of professors and industry professionals. She was poised and brilliant, her arguments sharp, her passion evident. She'd gotten early acceptance to MIT but was considering other options, wanting to forge her own path rather than follow her father's footsteps too closely. He'd never been more proud. After the presentation, as they walked across campus together, Mira linked her arm through his. You know what's weird? What's that? I can't really remember what it was like before. Before you knew about me. Before we were a family. Do you wish you could? No. She shook her head. That girl who broke into your house every night, she was looking for something she thought she'd lost. But she didn't realize she just hadn't found it yet. And did she? Find it? Yeah. She squeezed his arm. We both did. Later that evening, Damien sat in what had once been the nursery and was now Myra's room, though she was rarely in it anymore except during school breaks. The constellations still shone on the ceiling. The planetary mobile still spun and caught the light. But now the room was lived in, loved in, filled with the evidence of a real childhood. Posters and books and photographs. College brochures and debate trophies and the threadbare blanket Mira still kept on her bed. He thought about the hook that had brought them together. A mysterious intruder. A security breach. A child brave enough to claim what should have been hers. He thought about Arya, about the grace she'd shown in her final weeks, the way she'd given him and Mira the chance to build something real even as she was leaving them. And he thought about the question she'd asked in that small apartment bedroom. What would you have done, Damien? Really? He still didn't know the answer. The man he'd been might have tried and failed. Might have meant well and chosen poorly. Might have loved his daughter but loved his ambition more. But the man he'd become, the man that Mira and Arya had helped him become, would choose differently every single time. Your presence is worth more than any present you could ever give. Career success means nothing if you don't have someone to share it with. Listen, really listen, when the people you love try to tell you something important. It's never too late to become the person you should have been, but don't wait until you've almost lost everything to figure out what matters. Damien Cole lost 12 years he could never get back. But he gained something priceless. A daughter who loved him enough to break into his life. A second chance he didn't deserve but grabbed with both hands. A family built from wreckage and choice and the stubborn belief that it's never truly too late. If this story moved you, it's because somewhere in it you saw yourself. Maybe you're chasing success at the cost of connection. Maybe you're working so hard to build a future that you're missing the present. Maybe you're the one waiting for someone to finally show up. Whatever your story is, remember this. The greatest security system in the world couldn't keep out love. Don't build walls so high that the people who matter can't reach you. Hit that like button if this story touched your heart. Subscribe to Mr. Stephen's Stories for more narratives that will change how you see life. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded what really matters. And drop a comment. Tell me, what would you do if you discovered you'd missed the most important moment of your life? I read every single comment. Thank you for watching. Remember, success is what you achieve, but significance is who you become and who you love along the way. The empty nursery became a home. The broken family became whole. And the billionaire who had everything learned that the only thing worth having was the daughter he almost never knew.